Before we start, take a moment to like and subscribe. What if the greatest hero in history wasn't a king, a general, or a born leader, but a guy who started out as a wanted fugitive? This isn't just a story about miracles. It's a legendary, action-packed saga about a reluctant hero who goes from being a pampered prince to a shepherd. And finally, to the single most important figure in his people's history. It's the epic 5-act journey of Moses. Our story starts with a big problem. The Israelites, an enormous population of enslaved people, had been toiling in Egypt for generations under the ruthless rule of the Pharaoh. He was so terrified they might one day rise up that he issued a horrifying decree. Every newborn Israelite boy must be thrown into the Nile River to drown. But one brave mother refused to let her baby boy meet such a terrible fate. She kept him hidden for 3 months, and when she couldn't hide him any longer, she came up with a desperate last-resort plan. She crafted a tiny basket out of reeds, sealed it with tar to make it waterproof, and gently placed her baby inside. With a heavy heart, she set the little basket adrift among the reeds of the Nile, praying for a miracle. And she got one. The basket floated right into the path of Pharaoh's own daughter, who was bathing with her servants. She saw the baby, took pity on him, and decided to raise him as her own. She named him Moses, which means to draw out, because she had drawn him out of the water. And just like that, the boy who was destined to die became a member of the most powerful family in the world. Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace, a world away from the hardships his people endured. He received the finest education, lived in unimaginable luxury, and had everything a prince could ever want. He was, for all intents and purposes, an Egyptian. But a part of him never forgot his roots. As he got older, he started to venture outside the palace walls, and his heart ached for his enslaved people. One day, he witnessed an Egyptian taskmaster brutally beating an Israelite slave. A rage boiled up inside him. He looked around to make sure no one was watching, and in a moment of pure, raw impulse, he killed the Egyptian and buried his body in the sand. The next day, he found 2 Israelites fighting and tried to intervene. One of them taunted him, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Are you going to kill me just like you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" The secret was out. Terrified and exposed, Moses fled the palace and the only life he had ever known. He went from living in a world of gold and power to hiding in the wilderness, running from his past and from the law. For the next 40 years, he became a simple shepherd in the land of Midian, far from the life he once knew. Just when it seemed Moses' life was settled and quiet came the day that changed everything. While tending his flock on Mount Horeb, he noticed a strange sight, a bush on fire, but not being consumed. He cautiously approached it, and from the flames, a voice called his name. It was God. God told Moses that he had heard the cries of the Israelites and had chosen Moses to be their leader and deliverer. Moses, a man who had been running for 40 years, was shocked. He argued with God, telling him he was nobody, that he wasn't a good speaker, and that the people would never believe him. "Who am I to do this?" he asked. But God promised to be with him and to give him the power he needed. He told Moses to go to Pharaoh and demand that he let his people go. Moses finally agreed to the insane mission, with his older brother Aaron acting as his spokesperson. This was no ordinary quest. Moses was a wanted man returning to the one place he was forbidden to go, with nothing but a stick and a divine mission. The stage was set for the ultimate showdown. Moses and Aaron returned to Egypt and stood before the mighty Pharaoh. The conversation was short and tense. "Let my people go." Pharaoh, of course, laughed at them and refused. But what followed was an escalating series of terrifying events known as the 10 plagues. With each plague, Moses and Aaron would confront Pharaoh, pleading for their people's freedom. The Nile River turned to blood. Frogs swarmed the land, gnats and flies infested the homes. And a devastating pestilence killed off all the livestock. Still, the Pharaoh's heart hardened. Plagues got worse. Boils erupted on people and animals, hailstones rained down with fire, and locusts devoured every last crop. Finally, A thick darkness covered the land for 3 days, a terrifying quiet that signaled the end was near. Pharaoh, once the ruler of a mighty empire, was helpless against a power he couldn't control. With each plague, he would promise to let the Israelites go, only to change his mind as soon as the danger passed. The 10th and final plague was the most devastating of all, the death of the firstborn. Only the Israelites who had painted lamb's blood on their doorposts as a sign were spared. Pharaoh finally broke. He begged Moses and the Israelites to leave immediately. The Israelites, a nation of over 1 million people, gathered their belongings and fled in haste. They marched toward the Red Sea, a seemingly impossible barrier, but their brief relief soon turned to terror. On the horizon, a massive cloud of dust appeared, growing larger and louder with every passing second. The rhythmic thunder of thousands of hooves and the glint of bronze from spears and chariot wheels confirmed their worst fears. Pharaoh had changed his mind. He and his entire army were in hot pursuit. The people were trapped. To their front lay the vast, impassable sea. To their rear, the most powerful army in the world. Cries of panic erupted. Men shouted in rage, children screamed in fear, and the elderly trembled in despair. "Why did you bring us here to die?" they shrieked at Moses. It would have been better to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. But Moses, with a calmness that defied the chaos around him, raised his hands. "Do not be afraid," he declared, his voice cutting through the noise. "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Then, following a command from God, he lifted his staff over the water. In an instant, an incredibly strong wind began to blow, rushing from the east with a force that made the people stagger. The sea, which had been a solid, unyielding barrier, began to churn. The waters at the shoreline were pushed back, and a deep rumbling sound filled the air as the ocean split in two. The two halves of the sea began to recede, rising up on either side of them like massive shimmering walls. The seabed, once a murky and wet expanse, was suddenly exposed, and the mud hardened into dry. Solid ground before their very eyes, the Israelites walked across on a path that was dry and firm, with the towering walls of water on their right and left. They could see the shadowy forms of sea creatures and schools of fish trapped within the shimmering, translucent walls of water. It was a sight of unimaginable wonder and terror. Just as the last person reached the other side, the Egyptian army, in their greed and fury, thundered onto the same path. Confident they could recapture the fleeing slaves, Moses raised his staff once more. The massive walls of water, which had been held in place by an invisible force, collapsed with a deafening roar. The sea rushed back, crashing down on the Egyptians in a single, powerful wave, swallowing them and their chariots whole. The Israelites were finally truly free. The victory was sweet, but the journey was far from over. Leading 1 million people through a vast desert was a never-ending challenge. The people complained constantly about thirst, about hunger, about everything. Moses, guided by God, provided for them, bringing water from a rock and sending manna and quail from the heavens. The most defining moment of their journey came at Mount Sinai. In a storm of fire, smoke, and thunder, God called Moses up the mountain. He gave him 2 tablets of stone with 10 rules, the 10 commandments that would guide the people's morality and behavior. But while Moses was away, the people grew impatient and decided to build an idol, a golden calf, and worship it. When Moses returned to see his people betraying God, he smashed the stone tablets in a fury. He was forced to plead with God to forgive the people and carve a new set of tablets to replace the broken ones. For 40 years, Moses guided his people through the wilderness, facing their rebellion and their triumphs. He was their leader, their judge, and their constant advocate with God. But Moses, despite his strength, was still human. In a moment of frustration, he lost his temper. And God told him that he would not be the one to lead the people into the promised land. At the very end of his long and legendary life, Moses climbed Mount Nebo. From the summit, he looked out across the Jordan River and saw the land of milk and honey, the land his people had been promised for generations. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking moment. He had brought them all the way to the doorstep of freedom, but he wouldn't get to step inside himself. He died there with the promise in view, leaving his legacy for a new generation to claim. Moses' story is a powerful reminder that heroes aren't perfect. They make mistakes, they get frustrated, but they keep going. His journey from an outcast to a liberator shows us that with enough courage and faith, even the most unlikely person can change the world.